A fond farewell from Queen and country to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Only close family were here at Windsor to pay their respects at a moving and deeply personal funeral service. It was the saddest of days for the Queen, seated alone for her final goodbye to her husband of 73 years, as the Duke's remarkable life and legacy were honoured.
For his resolute faith and loyalty, for his high sense of duty and integrity, with all the faithful departed, grant thy peace.
Amidst the loss, a reunion. Princes William and Harry seen together for the first time in a year, briefly united in grief. As around the country, the Duke was remembered with fondness and deep respect.
It was a really brilliant moment for all of us to just pause and say, you know what, thank you, Prince Philip, for all the things that you've contributed to. Thank you for the things that you've done.
From Windsor, this is ITV News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening from Windsor, where today the Queen and members of her immediate family said a final farewell to the Duke of Edinburgh. A day full of pageantry and praise for the Prince's service to the country and indeed Her Majesty. COVID restrictions meant that the Queen was seated apart from her family, only 30 of whom were able to attend. But far beyond Windsor, the nation united in a minute's silence to pay their respects. John Ray reports on Prince Philip's final journey.
Into the sunshine of a glorious spring afternoon, the body of Prince Philip was carried. His coffin draped in the personal standard of the Duke of Edinburgh, his sword and his naval cap on top. Then, in widow's black, the first public glimpse of his wife since her husband's death. The Queen's face, perhaps her emotions, hidden behind a mask that is the mark of our time. And for the first time, it was she who followed her husband, her loyal consort and companion for 73 years. In loving memory, read the handwritten card on the back of the coffin. Walking behind the cortege, his children, Charles and Anne, and then Andrew and Edward. Behind them, the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex, brothers at odds, reunited today in circumstances neither of them would have chosen. This was a ceremony confined within the walls of Windsor Castle, reduced in size but not diminished in meaning. A funeral to Philip's detailed design, down to the Land Rover he helped adapt to act as a hearse. At the Galilee porch, the Queen was greeted by the Dean of Windsor. She paused for just a moment to allow a brief look back and to watch as her husband's coffin passed by. The cortege ended its brief journey at the steps of St. George's Chapel. A minute's silence was observed here and across the home nations. The Queen, alone with her grief, with her memories of a marriage and of a man she had known her entire adult life. This was a family funeral, but one watched by many millions of people around the world.
We are here today in St. George's Chapel to commit into the hands of God the soul of his servant Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
In keeping with royal tradition, there was no eulogy and no sermon, but every word chosen, every note of music evoked the Prince.
We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude and faith.
The first hymn selected by Phillip in memory of his naval career and in tribute to the sailors with whom he served in the Second World War.
Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril on the sea.
Through much of the service, the Queen sat, head bowed, in an isolation familiar to all those who have lost loved ones during the pandemic.
We remember before thee this day Phillip, Duke of Edinburgh, rendering thanks unto thee for his resolute faith and loyalty, for his high sense of duty and integrity, for his life of service to the nation and Commonwealth, and for the courage and inspiration of his leadership.
On Philip's orders there was little pomp or pageantry, except for this, the reading of his many honours.
Lord High Admiral of the United Kingdom, one of Her Majesty's most honourable Privy Council, Admiral of the Fleet, Field Marshal in the Army, and Marshal of the Royal Air Force, husband of Her Most Excellent Majesty, Elizabeth II,
A piper played a lament as Philip's body was lowered into the royal vault beneath the chapel, to lie with the kings and queens who rest there. None had served the institution of monarchy for longer. Then the Navy's call to arms, action stations. Life must go on was Philip's last message to his family. Though for the Queen, his loss leaves a void which can never be filled. Back in the daylight, his son and heir to the throne put a handkerchief back in his pocket and seemed composed. His grandsons chatted amiably, a scene that would have pleased Philip. And the Queen, accompanied by her lady-in-waiting, left as her husband would have wished, to continue her duties. John Ray, ITV News.
Well, with mourners asked not to travel to Windsor, many stayed close to home to pay their own respects to the Duke. The silence was observed up and down the country, and there were gun salutes from royal regiments in all parts of the UK. Rachel Younger reports on a nation's tributes.
In every corner of the country, they stood to remember a man who served it for so long. A minute's silence, bookended by a single shot. Guns fired in both the city that bears the Duke's name and in every one of the home nations. On a day when politicians and the public alike were asked to reflect in private, this was the people's moment to show their support for the Queen. And at the Tower of London, they did just that.
I think the Queen will be lonely now, so I thought it's good to come here and support them.
It's a big loss to the Queen, and none of us, to mourn someone, you want to do it in private, and clearly she can't do that. So you really feel for her today.
They stood in socially distanced silence at Birmingham New Street, reflecting on all the Duke had given.
I think we've lost a great man. Obviously his spirit will live on among all of us. It's a sad day for the whole of the UK and the Commonwealth as well.
It would have been nice for him to get to 100, but nevertheless I think his contribution has been massive to the country.
In Ascot, they followed the Duke's final journey on television, remembering him in the most apt of locations.
It's the end of an era, isn't it? So, 99 years, I think that we need to come out and show our respects as well.
With lockdown, it's taken its toll, and we can pay tribute to a tradition most of us have known all our lives.
In Sandringham, where people might have gathered in different times, they left flowers instead. A grateful nation paying simple tribute to the most remarkable of men. Rachel Younger, ITV News.
Well, pupils at Prince Philip's old school in the northeast of Scotland paid their own respects today. And our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith is at Gordonston this evening. So, Peter, how did they remember the Duke?
Well, when we consider that the young Prince Philip arrived here in September of 1934, he was just the school's 10th pupil at the time, and he was a 13-year-old boy who had had a nomadic upbringing, and he called this place home. He settled here, even turned into the alpha male the world came to know, helping to repair some of the main building behind me, constructing with other pupils some of the footpaths that the pupils today walk on, very much following in his footsteps. And a third of the pupils here today are on scholarships funded through the Prince Philip Foundation. But it was at sea that Prince Philip really thrived here. The new pictures just released today show the young prince on board the school yacht. This is the future Admiral of the Fleet in the Royal Navy. He's helping out with the washing up on deck. And it was in that tradition today that the staff and pupils of Gordonston paid a unique tribute to him, laying a wreath at sea, the very waters in which he thrived and learned to sail. And now, while the nation today has said farewell to a prince and the royal family said goodbye to a relative, at Gordonston they have honoured one of their own.
Peter Smith at Gordonston, thank you, and wonderful, wonderful pictures there. Well, the Duke touched many lives, not just through his royal duties, but with his friendships and sporting endeavours too. And as Rebecca Barry found out, for those that met him and even knew him, today's service had an extra poignancy.
I'm very glad I knew him when we were young.
Robin watched the nation pay tribute from a unique perspective. Not only has she lived through the same 10 decades as Prince Philip, she's 100, but she was also his friend.
I must be one of the very, very few people alive who remember when we were both young. Both Prince Philip and myself were young and had fun in the war.
Back then, Robin was in a relationship with David Mountbatten, the Duke's cousin and best friend.
I'm sad as one sad when any friend dies, and I think he didn't change. He was the same when he was young as he was when he died, I think. I just feel sad.
The person I was when I was 17 and the person I was after doing the scheme are two different people.
In Brighton, someone just starting out on a life of duty. Medical student Joel. He met the Duke of Edinburgh through his award scheme, an experience he says changed his life.
Watching the funeral for me was personally very sad and very moving, and I think it was a really brilliant moment for all of us to just pause and say, you know what, thank you, Prince Philip, for all the things that you've contributed to. Thank you for the things that you've done.
In some ways a hard taskmaster. He wanted it right. It always had to be right.
Philip Bateman knew the Duke for 37 years, bonding over their shared love of horses and carriage driving.
Of course I'll miss him. Me and thousands of others.
Very few from the Duke's generation are here today to mark his passing, but many, old and young, will feel his loss. Rebecca Barry, ITV News.
Let's take a quick look at a couple of other stories today. And more than 3 million people worldwide have now died with coronavirus. The milestone was passed as India and parts of South America struggle with a resurgence of the virus. 140 million cases have now been recorded. Here, though, there was another step towards unlocking. The World Snooker Championships in Sheffield welcomed fans back today. More than 300 people were there, all of whom had been tested for COVID, and it is the first of a series of government test events. Well, let's return to our main story today, the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh. Royal Editor Chris Shipp is here. What a day, Chris.
Yeah, what a day. It really was. And I think there were For me, there were 7 seconds at the very end of that order of service that was sort of more Prince Philip than anything else. More perhaps than the Land Rover, more than the military, more even than the ponies and the carriage driving. And what a sight that was in the corner of the rectangle. And those 7 seconds was when he specifically asked the buglers of the Royal Marines to sound action stations. And that was Prince Philip's message, not just to his family, but to us as a nation, to say, right, we're done now, we've had enough of this, let's move on, let's get back in with the job. And I wonder whether, wherever he is now, if he was looking down, he saw the shots of William and Harry walking back up the hill after the funeral service. And I think most people will understand and appreciate how after a funeral service there is a moment of calm when you can take a deep breath. They were talking and they haven't spoken for the best part of a year. And I wonder whether this is a moment that he might think maybe it brought them back together. Who knows? There's a lot of things to sort out, but it was quite the day.
Yeah. Chris Shipp, thank you very much indeed. And that brings to an end our programme on the day. The country said farewell to the Duke of Edinburgh. A spectacular setting for his funeral, Windsor Castle, his home, of course, with the Queen for so many happy years. The royal family today united in their grief for their patriarch, father, grandfather and great-grandfather, whose fingerprints were so very evident in each and every detail of today's ceremony. Tonight, though, thoughts must turn to the Queen as she continues without the remarkable man who devoted his life to hers for more than 73 years. Goodbye.